let's get the TB3 parameters set up to get the shot you want exactly. After you set your endpoint, you have the option to select your interval. Interval is all about how quickly the camera is shooting. Another way to put it is how often we are triggering your shot starts. If we have a 2-second interval, we are starting a shot every 2 seconds. Use the up and down arrow to select what you want. Longer intervals mean you are speeding up time more. If you're taking a shot every 10 seconds and you put it into a 24 frames per second composition, you're speeding up time a lot. If you're shooting a 1-second interval, you're speeding up time less. So faster subjects for shorter intervals is a really good idea. Let's leave it at the default 2 seconds for right now and progress by pressing the C button. Next, we are seeing real-time duration balanced with frames. This, along with interval, is going to tell you a lot of information and you're going to be able to balance your shot. If we're shooting 240 frames at the previously set 2-second intervals, we're getting 8 minutes of real-time shooting. If we increase the number of frames, our total duration goes up. If we decrease that, it goes down. Now, if we had set a longer interval, and we can go back and do that too by hitting the Z button, let's bump that up to 3 seconds. You can see for the same number of frames that we had before, 240, we're now up to a higher shoot duration. So very quickly between these two screens, by going forward by hitting C or going back by hitting the Z button, we can balance the total number of frames with our total shot duration with our interval. Hit the C button when you're satisfied. Now we're going to set the static time. The rule of thumb here is to first jump onto your camera and understand what the exposure is. If you were shooting daytime shots and you're shooting a fast exposure, say 100th of a second, 60th of a second, you can use the default of 0.1 seconds. If you're shooting longer exposures for night shots, we really need to be careful on this. And the rule of thumb is this: with static time, figure out what your exposure is, what your shutter time is, and add 1/10 of a second. And if you're shooting a 2-second exposure off of your camera, select a 2.1 second static time. Hit the C button to continue. Ramp is all about how smooth your starts and stops in the final footage are going to look. A low ramp means you're going to have a very abrupt start and stop. It's going to look like what maybe a robot would shoot. Very abrupt starts and stops. If you have a high ramp value, and this is the number of frames, you'll have a much smoother start and stop. We'll show you some examples of a shot with a very low ramp and a very high ramp. Hit C to continue. Set static lead-in and lead-out frames. What we've been setting up until now is all about the motion of the camera. It's all about how often we're shooting. What this setting allows you to do is create static dwell time at the beginning of your sequence and at the end of your sequence. If you want to shoot 24 frames or a second of footage at 24 frames a second where the TB3 is not moving, you can select that here. Default is typically 1. The way you transition between these two screens is unique in the TB3 setup. We use the left and right to select the lead-in or the lead-out frames. If you don't want any lead-in frames, you don't have to have it. Default is 1. Maximum is 5,000. This is more for artistic license to define dwell time and static time at the beginning and end of your shot. When you're satisfied with that, press C. TB3 moves back to its start point, and you're ready to start your sequence.